Coming in at number 10 is exploding with very serious limits. Bailey Hoskins. It's a name known by way too few people, but it should be known by more. Bailey found out that both his parents were mutants, which pretty much guaranteed that he also possessed the X gene and a mutant power. Bailey, alongside his parents, paid a visit to the Xavier Institute to find out what exactly his power was. After some tests done by Hank McCoy, Beast, Bailey was informed that his mutant ability was the power to make himself explode. An incredibly useful combat ability that came with one massive caveat. Bailey could only explode one time. He had no ability to regenerate after the explosion. I mean, when we think about it, being able to regenerate after you literally explode in a ball of fire makes no sense whatsoever. But kudos to this comic for having a realistic portrayal of what having the power to explode would actually likely be like. But what's worse is that now, as a mutant, Bailey is accepted by his fellow mutants with literally no way to contribute other than doing things that literally anyone else could do. If you had the power to explode one time, what good would that ever do for you as an individual? Literally none. And at number 9 is pyrokinesis with no immunity to fire. When I was a kid, I always thought that the superheroes who could control fire were the coolest ones. Johnny Storm was the prime example. He's arguably the coolest member of the Fantastic Four, not temperature-wise, obviously. But at that younger age, I never actually questioned whether or not the characters were impervious to flame. I just assumed that that comes with the power. Well, I was wrong. Mutants like Pyro can control flame, but are hurt by any flame they aren't actually controlling. But his Ultimate Universe counterpart, this was not the case, and he was actually covered in tons of scar tissue from the use of his own powers. Any flame he controlled also burned him. I also believe there is an unnamed mutant from the Xavier Institute who could set herself on fire but was completely susceptible to the burns she would receive. Although for the life of me I couldn't actually find the comic book she was a part of, so if any of you know who I'm talking about, I think she showed up for like one panel, let me know down in the comments below. Either way, that would be an absolutely horrible power to have. And at number 8 is a quasi-sonic scream. Black Bolt of the Inhumans is 1. Surprisingly useless, but 2. has one of the most destructive abilities of all his people. A single itty bitty whisper from this guy could level an entire city, or cause dormant volcanoes to become active again, or shake entire continents apart while creating tremors on the other side of the planet. A full-on hypersonic shout that has been able to completely destroy entire celestial bodies. I'm talking about planets and moons and all that kind of stuff. This means that Blackagar Baltagon had to go through rigorous training and a huge level of self-control to make sure that he never unintentionally destroys everything he loves and cherishes. But I got a couple questions here. What if he sneezes? What if he coughs? What if he gets hit and accidentally lets out like an involuntary sound? What if there was one of those contests run by a radio station where you knew the answer and you had to call in to claim it? Look, people live their lives not being able to talk, but to make no sound whatsoever, do you know how hard that would be? I would not want this power. I'm out. And at number 7 is Hindsight. To be completely candid here, Hindsight Lad's powers are not actual powers, but he acts like they are, and that means I'm going to talk about how much the real superheroes all hate him. Carlton Lefroy was a nuisance before he even became Hindsight Lad, but when he found out that his neighbor, Robbie Baldwin, was Speedball of the New Warriors, he threatened to reveal Robbie's secret identity unless Robbie let him be a part of the team. He actually managed to prove very useful and did have some tactical ability, which eventually got him fully put on the team. He kind of became their guy in the chair, but that's because his self-given power was the power of hindsight. The power to look back at all the superhero fights that he's been a part of and analyze them, and now, with the present hindsight, he can tell the heroes what they should have tried differently, which in his mind meant that they can now prepare if that exact same scenario plays out again in exactly the same way. Which, newsflash, in superpower-based combat, it's not likely to happen very often. The moral of the story of Hindsight Lad is that you don't want to be this guy. You are not going to have many friends, and if you do, they will still find that aspect of you extremely annoying. Number 6, Compass Powers. Hindsight's powers are hilarious, but everything about this is hilarious. So, during the events of Spider Island, the Jackal had used bed bugs to basically infect a large majority of Manhattan with a virus that gives them Spider-Man-like abilities and even turns some of them into giant mutated spider people. Now that part is obviously not very hilarious, but thanks to some smart thinking, the heroes eventually learned that those with powers already, like mutants and Inhumans, were immune to the spider virus. So now, the question is, how do we give regular people powers to cure them of the virus without creating a whole city of extremely powerful people, some of whom would become supervillains if they wanted to? Reed Richards had the cunning plan to give everyone powers, but just not very good ones. So, what powers did he give the entire population of Manhattan? Compass powers, aka the ability to be able to detect which way is north. Could this be useful? Absolutely. Are there tons of ways to figure out north without needing a power? Also, absolutely. Also, for people in Manhattan, the city is built on a grid with numbered streets, so everyone already knows which way north is. It's just lame. Number 5, reverse aging. Invincible has some great characters with some actually unique powers. For Monster Girl, or Amanda, she had been placed under a curse that allows her to transform into a masculine-looking troll-like monster at will. With super strength, able to lift 60 tons, accelerated healing, and superhuman dense tissue that makes her very hard to hurt. But it's called the curse for a reason. When Amanda reverts back to human form, her cells rebuild incorrectly, which is bad, in case you didn't know. Because of this, Amanda gets younger and younger looking each time she uses her monster form. But her monster form would grow larger as she got younger, so like, you know, you win some and you lose some. When she made her comic book debut, Amanda was 29, but she had the appearance of a 12-year-old girl. Now, Robot gave her a belt that would store part of her original cells when she transforms and keep them until she reverts back, helping her to stay looking her actual age eventually. But without this magical science fiction belt, I mean the whole thing's science fiction, but Amanda would have eventually just kept de-aging until I'm assuming she wouldn't be able to survive anymore, or she would just stop using her powers. Either way, a loss and not really worth it. And number 4 is detachable arms. If you have ever needed someone to lend you a hand, well, Arm Fall Off Boy would have been the ideal guy to have at arm's length. Sorry, 2 puns in one. His name kind of describes exactly what his power is. Floyd Belkin, who eventually went by the less hilarious name of Splitter, had the curious ability to take off his own arms, which he could use primarily as a club to beat up criminals with. So basically, Arm Fall Off Boy's power was to gain extended reach, but with the cost of literally only having one usable arm, which is now preoccupied holding the arm that he just took off. Do you see why this power is not exactly a great advantage? At least he isn't alone. His whole family, known lovingly as the Fall Off family, can all detach different parts of their bodies. In this current family tree, we got head fall off mom, legs fall apart in segments dad, fingers fall off gal, who is his sister, butt fall off Gma Deb Deb, who is the grandmother, and then just freaking granddad Glenn. I'm so glad that this is not a joke. They all appeared in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen Volume 2 Number 9 in 2020. Check it out, please. And at number 3 is the power to produce tar. Being a Morlock is a prime example why mutants get the bad end of the stick sometimes. If your mutation makes you physically undesirable or makes living in regular human society an issue, then you get slapped with the name Morlock, which is horrible, and you go and live with the other Morlocks because they are the only ones who will accept you. At least that's how it used to be. Not to mention there was the whole mutant massacre thing. Horrible. Most people wouldn't choose this life willingly. Tar Baby certainly did not. First of all, that is an incredibly questionable name to give yourself, but it does check out. This Morlock has the ability to secrete a black tar-like substance through the pores of his skin that is incredibly sticky and causes things to permanently stick to him on contact. Just imagining this makes me annoyed. Especially if you had like little control over the ability, things would be sticking to you left, right, and center. How could someone go through life like that? The amount of things I would get unintentionally stuck to or have stuck to me, this would just be the most annoying power to have. No. And at number 2 is being infectious. I think Infectious Lass is actually kind of an interesting idea for an an alien. Her real name is Drura Sept, and she comes from the planet Somator, however you pronounce that. All the inhabitants of this planet have bodies that are homes for colonies of thousands of microorganisms that carry thousands and thousands of infectious diseases, which gives them an immunity to disease, and that part is absolutely a power that everyone should want. The only problem is that they have to interact with other species who don't have this ability, meaning while they can to a degree control who gets infected, it's not exactly flawless, and the risk of infecting others is pretty high, even accidentally. Now imagine you were on Earth, which you are, and we're the only person with this ability. How the hell are you supposed to interact with anyone or anything? You'd have to wear a hazmat suit all the time. The power would make people absolutely fear you, which sure could be a blessing if you hate people, but like even your loved ones? You want a pet? Too bad, buddy. Kids? Don't even think about it. It would be rough. And finally, in at number 1 is acidic vomit. The reason for why you wouldn't want this superpower is given to us in the very introduction of the character who possesses it. In X-Force number 116 from 2001, we are introduced to the character of Axel Clunny. Axel developed the power of acidic vomit midway through a little intoxicated romantic rendezvous with a girl on the beach. They were making out, and that's when Axel suddenly had to hurl, and when he did, he managed to dissolve a large part of this poor girl's face. If that wasn't bad enough, Axel couldn't even remember the girl's name. Now look, the applications of this power could potentially be many, but this acidic vomit would need to be accompanied by a control over vomiting and a control over when the vomit is actually acidic, the latter being something Axel does not possess. Now I don't know about you guys, but I have never found a particularly opportune time to spew chunks. Now imagine every time you had to, it also came with the risk of not only completely dissolving whatever you were using to catch it, but also dissolving anything else it came into contact with, like the floor, or your clothes, or I don't know, the girl on the beach you're making out with. I'm sorry for all the images I have given you to think about here, but I didn't create this power, so it's not my fault. It's gross. It's bad. But back to the list, starting off at number 10, we have Stone Boy. Dag Wentham is going all the way at the top of this list because his abilities are actually very useful, and I don't even know if I can say you wouldn't want them necessarily. Essentially, Dag is an alien from the planet Zwen, and his species has developed the unique ability to turn their entire bodies to stone, going into a sleep-like state that protects them from the harsh weather that their planet experiences for months at a time. The benefits of this are actually very many. You become basically unhurtable, you resist extreme weather, and you can pass as an incredibly realistic looking statue. But the big part of this is, while you are stone, you cannot move or do anything at all. So like, let's say you're being attacked by someone who very seriously wants to do you harm. Sure, you can turn to stone, but then all said person has to do is wait for you to turn back. Or just get something capable of breaking stone, because stone isn't exactly unbreakable, you know what I mean? Because of the lack of usefulness of this ability, he was rejected from the Legion of Superheroes and instead joined the Legion of Substitute Heroes. And his body was actually used to toss at opponents, so in that way, he was useful. Personally, I'd like this ability, and because DC felt bad for him, they eventually gave him the ability to control his ability a bit more, being able to actually move and to only transform part of his body into rock, which yes, that is cool. But regular old turning to a movable stone? I don't know if I'd want that. What do you guys think? And at number 9 is Glob Herman. Robert Glob Herman's body is made up primarily of a bioparaffin, which is basically living wax. He's highly flammable, although resistant to that flame, and also resistant to most damage in general. He's also, for some reason, superhumanly strong and fast. I don't know how that works, but hey, I just work here. But you know what else? Because of his main amount of tissue being made up of this waxy stuff, he is basically pink and transparent, meaning you can see all of his bones and internal organs, and my god, it is a sight to behold. There is no way that Glob can pass for human, not even a little bit. He also doesn't wear clothes, so when he's around you, you 100% see him in all his pink globiness. Almost any mutant who has a visible mutation gets things rough, but Glob's is by far one of the most drastically noticeable ones. But hey, he can fling bits of himself at people as a projectile, so that's kinda cool, I guess. Either way, I doubt a single one of you can give me a positive to looking like Glob. And at number 8 is Chamber. When you say out loud that Jonathan Starmore's power is that he is a being composed of pure psionic energy, able to manipulate biokinetic flame and in possession of limited amounts of telepathy, then you'd be like, whoa, that's freaking awesome. I want that power. Then I tell you that his body is just a shell for his psionic energy form, and when his powers first emerged, it completely blew a hole in his chest and lower half of his face, completely incinerating most of his internal organs and meaning that he can't talk, eat, or drink, and that the wound was replaced by a constantly burning chasm of flame. Then you'd be a little less inclined to say how great this power is, wouldn't you? Are you a foodie? Well, too bad, no food for you. Do you like the taste of beverages? Sucks to suck, bucko. There was even a point after his powers emerged and blew a hole in his face and chest that Chamber was depowered, meaning that he had to be kept on life support, and it was one of the most horrifying scenes I have ever seen in a comic book. No thanks, I'll pass. And at number 7 is Spore. Spore, or Andrew Graves, is honestly a bit of a tragic story. He's got 2 mutations, the first of which would be that he is covered in long brown hair or fur, and he also may have been given animal-like abilities, but that's not really confirmed. This unfortunate appearance caused his father, who was an absolute garbage human being, to blame his mother for their mutated child, and he caused her death using paint thinner. His dad forced Andrew to eat garbage, and when he finally grew up, Andrew had a super intense hatred for not only humans, but for himself as well. But Spore's secondary mutation was probably his namesake. He could release mood-altering pheromones which caused people to become incredibly more aggressive. Now, he could direct this aggression at specific targets, which is arguably kind of useful if you enjoy making people fight each other, but then again, you may be a psychopath if that's the case. But Spore wouldn't do that. Because he truly, absolutely hated himself, he would leave the aggression uncontrolled, hoping that the aggression would be directed at him as well. It does really make me wonder what Andrew would have become if he had a loving family, but considering he didn't, and so his powers were only ever used to harness people's aggression, then I have to say that it's a power you really shouldn't want to have. Number 6, Ice Cream. Now, I saw some people mention Soft Serve, who has the ability to poop ice cream, and that does not sound like a bad one to me, I gotta say. I'd love that. Free ice cream whenever I want, sign me up. Forge even tried her ice cream once and said it was the best damn ice cream he'd ever had. So yeah, I'd take that. But another mutant who has ice cream powers who I would not want to be is Ice Cream. Some of you suggested him as well, and this one I can get behind, but it depends on a few things. If the amount of ice cream I turn into is exactly proportionate to my own body weight, like if I'm 150 pounds, do I turn into a 150 pounds of ice cream? Or can I generate more ice cream that I can actually get to enjoy? Also, he has turned into a banana split, complete with the banana and everything, so does that mean I can turn into any ice cream related foods? If I can't produce extra ice cream, then I would hate to have this power, because not only does that mean I can't enjoy the ice cream, but also people and animals, especially small children, will try to eat me and it will affect me. Not only that, but ice cream was defeated by the temperature in the danger room being really cold. I live in Canada, I'd be screwed. He was also eaten by a clown, and that is terrifying. Number 5, Forget-Me-Not. Forget-Me-Not is a mutant with the incredibly unique ability to be in a state of constant existential superposition. This basically means that Forget-Me-Not is more like Forget-Me-A-Lot. Whenever he is not in direct eyeline of another person, everything about him, from his presence to any memories that involve him, just completely disappear. And that's not only from things that are alive. When he is caught on camera, it doesn't even register on the footage or picture. It just leaves a big, noticeable distortion, which does give people a clue that he did exist, but they still can't remember that he's the one who made that happen. The same thing goes for if he uses things, so when he uses toilet paper, you obviously see that the toilet paper had been used, which would make him a perfect excuse for when someone gets mad when you don't change the toilet paper roll once it's empty. Just saying. His interactions with people do leave them with gaps in their memory, which some telepathic characters can pick up on, and leaving reminders for yourself about Forget-Me-Not does also help, which is what Charles Xavier had to do when Forget-Me-Not was a member of the X-Men team for 6 years and no one knew about it. Although, it would be an incredibly sad life to live. You could get away with a hell of a lot, so for someone who is okay being completely alone, it's kinda cool, but still. A really great quote for him goes, "It's better to do something that matters and not be noticed than the other way around," which is both sad and kinda really inspirational for just him. And at number 4 is Rogue. Rogue is an incredibly popular member of the mutant community and the X-Men, and as such, a lot has changed with her character over time so that she doesn't really qualify for this list anymore. But for argument's sake, we are going to talk about the classic version of Rogue and her abilities. Primarily, she can absorb the abilities, psyche, and memories of anyone who she comes into skin-to-skin contact with. This is actually incredibly useful and is a huge boon in a world full of superpowered beings. One of the biggest times she did this is when she permanently gained the super strength and flight powers of Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers. But her abilities come with a huge drawback. The skin-to-skin contact will cause a person to be rendered unconscious. This was completely out of her control. Famously, the first time she discovered her abilities was when she kissed her boyfriend at the time. This inadvertently caused the poor guy to be put into a coma, one that he never woke up from. He stayed in a coma for 10 years, eventually just passing away. Although it isn't confirmed that her powers are lethal, she has put people into permanent vegetative states, and that's just not something you'd want to be able to do for yourself. Not voluntarily, at least. It's the same as not being able to touch anyone, and it makes life incredibly difficult unless she comes into contact with someone who can resist her abilities. And in our real world, that just doesn't exist. Number 3, the Thing. Now, I saw a lot of people bring up the Thing in their suggestions, and I mean, okay, let's talk about this one. I think there are a lot, and I do mean a lot of upsides to being the Thing. He's got incredibly durable rock-like skin, musculature, bone structure, internal organs, and soft tissue, making him incredibly difficult to hurt, with adamantium being one of the only things that can actually hurt him. His strength has become so impressive over time, he is consistently referenced as a rival to the Incredible Hulk, although that is debatable. He has incredibly increased stamina and lung capacity, sensory adaptation, and he does not age, all of which are powers you probably would want. But there are also a fair share of downsides. Ben Grimm is basically an oversized rock monster. Apart from making him stand out in a crowd and the fact that he is treated like a monster by some people, his sheer size makes using everyday appliances and objects extremely difficult. It's basically a handicap. But more than that, his rocky skin has robbed him of his feeling of touch. Not only can he not feel objects, but like people, he can't fully appreciate a hug. That just makes me sad. So yes, there are tons of upsides, but being turned into a monster with no feeling is a fate most people would not want. Luckily, thanks to his serum, he can turn back into a regular guy one day a year, and he does have one of the most loving and caring families in the Marvel Universe, the Fantastic Four. And at number 2 is Crazy Jane / Legion. Both Crazy Jane from DC's Doom Patrol and Marvel's mutant David Haller, or Legion, both have a very unique ability. They both have access to a large degree of different abilities, but every ability is attributed to a personality in their head, as both of these characters have dissociative identity disorder. Do I think the idea of being able to switch to different powers whenever you want, if you have control over it, is cool? I think so. But anyone who actually wants to give themselves a mental disorder is incredibly arrogant of the negative side effects of such a thing. Having a mental disorder is not something you want. It's not cool, it sucks. It's a problem, not a superpower that people sometimes spend their entire lives trying to cure. But then you add the fact that some of these different personalities have powers that can actually hurt people. And then you add a whole other level to this thing. Now, sure, these characters are heroes, and more often than not, they use their abilities to help people, but it's not always as simple as that. All I'm saying is that you should not want to have dissociative identity disorder. End of discussion. And finally, in at number 1 is Red Mask. This may be one of the absolute worst powers to have in terms of trying to live a normal life. Red Mask is an Animal Man villain from DC Comics, and he probably has one of the saddest stories from the publisher. In 1945, Red Mask, whose real name is never told to us, came into contact with a meteor that gave him the power of Death Touch. This basically means any living thing that he touches dies. Ben Grimm, he can't feel anything, but this guy literally is not allowed to touch anything because he will kill it. It didn't take long for Red Mask's wife to leave him, and after that he became a villain. Now I will say, he has the potential to become one of the most deadly villains, only he's literally just so depressed he doesn't even have the motivation. He was partnered with a villain called the Veil, but then the Veil's powers drove the guy insane and he was locked up in Arkham Asylum. His story in the Animal Man comics basically follows him getting a lung disease and then releasing an army of easily defeatable robots on the city of Miami, and then throwing himself off of a building. Now, in real life, I can't imagine any sane person who would want this. You can't have romantic relationships, not to mention kids, no pets, no plants, you can't shake someone's hand, you can't hug anyone, you can't even give or receive a high five. I think this is the worst of the worst. Coming in at number 10, a host for a symbiote. Now look, there are some pretty awesome symbiotes out there. They're almost all pretty powerful. They all look incredibly awesome and they all grant their hosts superhuman abilities, but more often than not, it seems like being the host to a symbiote is a curse more than a power. Unless you are the perfect pairing of moral and physical ideal, which almost no one is, bonding with a symbiote will be a give and take relationship, and it's usually just you giving and them taking. They will take your body and use it, even when you are sleeping, feeding off of your emotions and a chemical produced by your brain, making you more aggressive and mentally unstable, or even just turning you against others, so kiss your relationships goodbye. Assuming the symbiote doesn't completely devour you after it's done using you, then it can just leave you high and dry, betraying you at any moment. They are next to impossible to control, and you're the one who usually has to compromise to give it what it wants. The symbiote could also asexually reproduce a version of all your worst aspects into another version of itself. It can become obsessed with you like a crazy ex, and even if it doesn't, it's next to impossible to remove. On top of all of that, you will very likely have to devour another person at some point when you host a symbiote. Sure, there are positives to being a symbiote host, but next to all the negatives, not really worth it in my opinion.
Number 9. Ultimate Colossus. Colossus in the classic Marvel universe has a pretty desirable power set. He has super strength and stamina, and is able to transform his body into a practically indestructible metal. This makes him a force to be reckoned with, and there's not really any downside to it. However, Colossus has a slightly different power set in the Ultimate Marvel universe. On Earth 1610, he is still able to transform his skin into a super tough metal, but he does not have super strength, which means that when he transforms, he becomes so heavy that he can't even move. So his power is still useful for like defense, but it is practically useless when it comes to doing anything but standing in a stationary position like an indestructible statue. Because he still had to do stuff, we eventually found out that he had regularly been using the illicit mutant growth hormone called Banshee that enhanced his powers, allowing him to have the super strength that is so associated and necessary for the character, but at the cost of him being hopelessly addicted to the substance. He became so dependent on Banshee that he was expelled from the school and the team and went on to lose control, becoming aggressive in his need for a fix.
Number 8. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is thousands of years old and is the sister of Genesis, who is the wife of Apocalypse. She is a hardened warrior who respects power and strength like the other mutants of Araco, and her powers reflect that. Iska's power is psychokinesis, which is the power over luck and probability, but specifically, her power means that she cannot lose, or the better way to say it is that she always wins. This includes one-on-one contests, votes, and wagers, but also larger battles where she's a member of a team or an army. In contests of skill, her power, including some limited shapeshifting, gives her the talents she needs to win. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talents she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. So far, it's sounding pretty good. Always winning is so good, it just sounds like ridiculous and lazy writing. But it also means that in larger battles or wars, her powers weigh the probability of the two sides and make her defect from the losing side and join the winning side, even if the losing side was composed of those she truly cares about. Meaning that even though she still technically won, she betrayed her closest friends and allies. Her power has also famously been used against her and one of her allies. When Tarn the Uncaring faced off against Magneto, the mutant Sunspot bet Iska that Tarn would win. So, because she would be betting against Tarn, who she had fought beside for thousands of years, was easily wiped off the face of Mars by Magneto, who crushed his head like a cherry. Her power is really good, it's just got some really crummy loopholes.
Number 7. Daredevil. When Matt Murdock was a child, he saved an old man who was about to be hit by a truck by heroically pushing him out of the way. This caused an accident where the radioactive isotope that the truck was carrying got in Matt's eyes, blinding him. Due to comic book science, the radiation also heightened Matt's other senses to a superhuman level. He was able to train these senses to develop his radar sense, which lets him be aware of his surroundings and do backflips. He can also hear people's heartbeats to tell if they are lying, and his sense of smell is so good that he can tell what someone had for lunch the day before. While this is an undeniably cool power set, there are some drawbacks. This causes a huge amount of sensory overload for Matt, which can be difficult to deal with. And he also lives in one of the stinkiest cities on the planet. Besides this, he's still blind. Matt's powers are more so him making the best of a bad situation than a cool thing that happened to him. Yes, doing sick flips would be cool, but the cost of never seeing your loved one's faces again is a pretty high cost that most people wouldn't pay if they had the option.
Number 6. Friendly Fire. As the only legit superpowered member of the ragtag team of misfits known as Section 8, you'd think that Friendly Fire would be that team's premier heavy hitter. The man has some pretty strong energy projection abilities, being able to fire beams of energy out of his hands. That's a pretty good power. But wait, why is he called Friendly Fire? That's because our hero here can't seem to ever intentionally hit a target. This is just due to his incredibly bad aim and his incredibly horrendous battle nerves. He's more likely to hit one of his own teammates or even an innocent bystander than any of his actual enemies. And in his final moments, he went even a step further when he managed to hit himself, blasting his own head completely off of his shoulders. Why anyone would want this power, I do not know. The good news is, no one on Section 8 is particularly desirable, even if you could call them a hero.
Number 5. The Hulk. When Bruce Banner was accidentally caught in the blast radius of his experimental gamma bomb, he underwent a startling metamorphosis. Whenever he becomes angry or outraged, he transforms into the Hulk. The Hulk is of course a giant green, sometimes gray rage monster who is prone to going on rampages and smashing things. Hulk is viewed as a monster by society, and by extension, so is Banner. So he has to be in constant control of his emotions, or he risks transforming into the creature. He typically has no memories of what happened while he was in Hulk form, so for Bruce, he usually is in a stressful situation, at which point he will go through an extremely painful looking transformation, black out, and then wake up miles away with no clothes other than a tattered pair of purple pants. Much like Adam at our company Christmas party. So while he is a great character to read, being the Hulk ruined Banner's life, as he is constantly being hunted and attacked, and it's really not a fate anyone in their right mind would want to put themselves through.
Number 4. Rainbow Girl. The Legion of Superheroes is full of some odd and unexpected superpowered beings, but since a lot of weirdos can make it onto the team, a lot of weirdos try out who don't quite have what it takes. Rainbow Girl is one such person. Instead, she made it onto the Legion of Substitute Heroes. But okay, so why is Rainbow Girl not good enough for the team? Well, she has an incredibly useful ability to harness the emotional spectrum. Red for rage, orange for greed, yellow for fear, green for will, blue for hope, indigo for compassion, and violet for love. You might be thinking that, hey, that's actually really cool. The different lantern cores harness the different colors of the emotional spectrum, and they're all incredibly capable. And you know what? You're right. The problem is that Rainbow Girl doesn't really have any control over this ability, and she basically has incredibly abrupt and drastic mood changes. She can also make rainbows and emit pheromones that make people like her, but the massive mood swings are not something you should want to have. The character, or more specifically the creators, landed in a little bit of hot water as she encapsulates the old-fashioned trope of women being emotional, and that's not good. We don't like that.
Number 3. Blight. First introduced in the Batman Beyond animated series, Derek Powers was an evil businessman who had gained control of Wayne Enterprises in the near future, featured in the show. He developed a mutagenic nerve gas which he intended to sell as a weapon, but the conspiracy was discovered by one of his employees. He had that employee taken out, and their son, Terry McGinnis, swore revenge on Powers, becoming the new Batman. While fighting Batman, Powers was exposed to the gas, and in order to survive, he was forced to undergo extreme radiation treatment. It saved his life, but it also transformed him into a spooky glowing green skeleton who calls himself blight. He's able to blend in with society if he wears a layer of false skin, but it deteriorates quite quickly. He can manipulate his radiation in order to shoot power blasts, and the extreme heat he gives off makes him immune to most melee attacks, and he can cause radioactive explosions around him. It's not all good though, as he is horrifyingly disfigured and can't be around people without either his false skin or a containment suit without causing everyone around him to die from radiation poisoning. This was unpleasant for the evil businessman, but for a typical person who has friends and people they care about, the inability to ever touch another person without them dying horribly would be pretty crap.
Number 2. Ten-Eyed Man. Philip Reardon is the Ten-Eyed Man, a threat to the Caped Crusader, a villain that requires intelligence to beat, some could say. The answer to the question of what happens if you take away a man's ability to see, in a combination of both a war injury and also an explosion at a warehouse that burned his retinas, but instead you reconnected his optic nerves to his hands, giving him the ability to see out of each of his fingertips. I don't know if anyone's actually ever wondered what that would be like, but now you know, and that is his only power. As you can imagine, this does pose some problems. For starters, his regular eyes are blind. So you put a pair of gloves on this guy, and he's done. Also, his weird eye finger things are extremely sensitive, so he is often easily defeated simply by injuring them, which can be done by tricking him into catching or touching something, or even theoretically by giving him a nice crisp high five. But let's not forget, it has been shown he can only be kept in a jail cell by keeping his hands locked in a special non-see-through box, because with eyes on his fingers, quote, escape would be child's play for him. So while I can see some advantages to this, sort of, I can also see a ton of downsides. And I can actually see them because I have eyes.
Number 1. Mr. Freeze. When Victor Freeze's wife Nora developed a generic fictional disease, McGregor syndrome stage 4 if you want to go off the Batman and Robin version, which I always do, he put her in cryostasis while he worked to find a cure. This led to a lab accident which involved Victor being exposed to the cryochemicals, and it transformed him into Mr. Freeze. There are some advantages to his condition. For example, his aging is dramatically slowed, and he is immune to cold-related illnesses and any other diseases, toxins, or poisons. But overall, it's a raw deal. He cannot be in an environment above a sub-zero temperature or he risks dying horribly. As a result, he is forced to wear his cryosuit whenever he leaves the house. As he put it in the classic Batman the Animated Series episode Heart of Ice, think of it, Batman, to never again walk upon a summer's day with a hot wind in your face and a warm hand to hold. Ah yes, I'd kill for that. In the animated series, his condition got even worse as time went on, with his body deteriorating until he was just a head in a jar, scuttling around with robot spider legs. No thanks.
Number 10. Chamber. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird. His powers relate to the fact that he is actually made out of pure psionic energy, or at least he was once his mutant powers manifested. When his powers first manifested, as a result, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face, basically blowing off his jaw. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. Jono, as a result, no longer needed to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood even did not need to course through his veins to keep him alive. As such, he is typically seen with a scarf or some other piece of clothing covering the lower half of his face, because you know, it's not there anymore, and he communicates telepathically, as his jaw was blown off when his powers first emerged, so you know, kinda hard to talk without a jaw.
Number 9. Flatman. Flatman, or Matt to his friends, is a mutant with the power of being flat and being able to stretch his limbs. He got his start working as a Mr. Fantastic impersonator at parties before eventually deciding to go into the hero business himself, joining the Great Lakes Avengers, assuming the false identity of Dr. Val Ventura. In addition to his stretching powers, Flatman can also make himself nearly invisible by turning to the side. Now, Mr. Fantastic's powers barely make any sense and are weird, but Flatman takes this to a whole new level. Unlike Mr. Fantastic, he must remain two-dimensional when using his powers, which brings up a lot of questions about the placement of his internal organs. But he is well versed in a made-up fighting style he calls origami fu. So make of that what you will.
Number 8. Beak. Beak is interesting in the sense that he has a physical mutation as a mutant, but one that is seemingly kinda useless. His mutation granted him wings and a beak, a bird-like appearance overall, but really these things are only an appearance alone. Beak does eventually manage to fly in the comics, but only after a long time trying to figure it out. And even then, he struggles really hard to do so, and can only fly for short distances at best. So he's no angel, if you know what I mean. Beak's real strength lies in his ability to be so likable. He makes friends easily and is usually more useful in that regard. What's even stranger though is you would think this might be challenging for someone like Beak, who, you know, looks pretty abnormal. However, this seems to have the opposite effect from what you'd expect, and instead of alienating people, Beak finds it all too easy to draw people near, relate to them, and make fast friends. But hey, he's a pretty nice guy, so I suppose when you really think about it, kinda does make sense.
Number 7. Forget-Me-Not. Not to be confused with the other Marvel character with the same superhero name who controls pheromones to make men fall in love with her, Poison Ivy style. Zabby has what could allegedly be called the power to be immediately forgotten by anyone he meets as soon as he leaves their field of vision. He was a member of the X-Men, although none of his teammates were aware of this most of the time. In fact, Professor X had to set up a psychic reminder to remind him once every hour that Forget-Me-Not existed. He had his uses and was especially good at reconnaissance missions, but once Xavier died, he became depressed and left the team. They didn't notice, despite the fact that he gave the eulogy. In the years since, he has taken up work on the mutant island nation of Krakoa as a detective, partnered with the Juggernaut. They make a good team considering that Juggernaut never remembers that he has a partner.
Number 6. Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is known for his weird power which, when it first manifested, actually scarred the face of a young woman he happened to be making out with at the time. His power is that he is acidic vomit, which I'm not really sure how you could best utilize that, and it would definitely make for quite the hazard if you had the flu and, you know, you're feeling really nauseous. He wears a protective mouthpiece to help prevent any other dangerous cases from happening. Zeitgeist's acid vomit is powerful enough that it can actually burn through solid steel, but other than that, he is just somewhat more durable than your normal mortal human, which I guess makes sense. If you are someone who can vomit acid, you have to be fairly durable to even be able to do that and live. Axel Clooney is a mutant and used to be the leader of the X-Force at one point, but currently leads the rival team to X-Statix known as the Excellent, which also, if you aren't reading the Excellent, you should check it out.
Number 5. Gold balls. Can you guess what gold balls is able to shoot out of his body? If you guessed gold balls, congratulations! Fabio Medina discovered this really odd mutant power while falling victim to a robbery in San Diego. Armed with his gold balls and his signature catchphrase, "Gold balls," Fabio took the world by storm as the newest member of the X-Men. Now, his powers don't make sense when you think about them too hard. Where are these balls coming from? How are they being formed so quickly? You know, the kind of weird stuff that applies to a lot of superheroes. But what sends Fabio into the realm of the bizarre is the fact that it was eventually discovered that the gold balls were actually infertile eggs that he was producing and shooting at people. In light of this news, Fabio retired the name Gold Balls and started calling himself Egg.
Number 4. Stone Boy. I think it says it all when you belong to a team with the words substitute heroes in the title. Dag Wentham is known as Stone Boy, and he belongs to the team known as the Legion of Substitute Heroes. He is an alien from the planet Zwen who can transform into a stone form, becoming super strong and super durable, but also immediately it makes him unable to move, rendering him completely immobile. Yeah, so not super useful in combat if you want to like actually do anything or beat someone, but pretty useful I guess if you just want to survive? Let me put it another way. Stone Boy also has not been spotted since the New Earth continuity existed. I think that tells you just how ridiculous his abilities are. So ridiculous that we can't even seem to find a place for him in the massive universe that is the Prime Earth continuity. And this is even after he finally manages to gain some ability in a possible future to move somewhat while in his stone form, post 0 hour that is.
Number 3. 3D Man. When the Skrulls abducted test pilot Chuck Chandler, the human proved more wily to deal with than they anticipated. He tried to escape on his rocket plane, but accidentally caused an explosion that destroyed both the Skrull ship and Chuck. Bizarrely, Chuck's brother Hal witnessed the explosion, which caused Chuck to become a two-dimensional being living in Hal's glasses, imprinting an image of Chuck in each lens. If you think that doesn't make much sense, just you wait. When Hal wears the glasses and concentrates really hard, he can merge the two images of his brother, causing Chuck to emerge as the 3D Man. When freed from the glasses, 3D Man has 3 times his normal physical abilities because, you know, 3D. As an extra bonus, Hal falls into a coma every time 3D Man comes out of his glasses, only waking back up when his brother returns to the glasses. This is a confusing and convoluted gimmick that doesn't really seem worth it if all it does is free a hero who's not particularly useful. Also, the name 3D Man must be confusing for characters who don't know every detail about his life. I mean, most things are in 3D, right?
Number 2, Arm Fall-Off Boy. Arm Fall-Off Boy has to be one of the weirdest ones out there. Unlike another odd hero, Bouncing Boy, who eventually in the Prime Earth continuity achieved his dream, Arm Fall-Off Boy has never made the cut for the Legion of Superheroes. And that's saying something, considering that the Legion of Superheroes themselves are kind of a weird superhero team by all definitions. Arm Fall-Off Boy has the power to detach his limbs, which he typically then attempts to use to beat his enemies with. I mean, it's pretty cool that he can remove his limbs and survive, but it's less cool that really all he does from there is use his arm or his leg as a weapon. Especially as this means he now has less limbs to like move himself with in combat, so that's really pretty silly. And so is the onomatopoeia that is often used to describe the sound of his power. Plorp. What a great onomatopoeia.
Number 1. Fluff. First appearing in excellent number 3, Fluff probably takes the cake for having the most confusing, disgusting, and odd power I've seen in a long time. Fluff is able to generate bucket loads of belly button lint at will and vary its chemical composition. Now first off, ew. Secondly, belly button lint is just stray clothing fibers that come off of your clothes and collect in your belly button. Trust me, I know. Fluff wears a costume with a very deep V, which allows his navel to feel those sweet summer breezes, which means that he wouldn't have any belly button lint, which begs the question, what exactly is he shooting out of his little tum-tum? You're free to speculate in the comments, but I refuse to give this character one more second of thought.
Number 10. Zeitgeist. Okay, he didn't actually initially start as a villain. Instead, Axel Clunny was actually the leader of the celebrity superhero mutant group known as X-Force, but after his death and revival, he did indeed become a criminal and villain. Now, Zeitgeist has a pretty unfortunate mutant superpower that first manifested in a very unfortunate incident. Basically, Zeitgeist could spew acidic vomit from his mouth, and he wore a protective mouthpiece in and out of his costume. He discovered this power during a little makeout sesh at a beach where he accidentally vomited and melted the girl's face half off. She did survive, but the real kicker is he can't even remember her name. See, he's not really a good guy at all. It was shown that his vomit could burn through 10cm thick steel in less than 30 seconds. Again, not a horrible power, just really unfortunate. Number 9. Armless Tiger Man. Gustav Hertz worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s. Now one day, his arms were caught in a machine and were amputated. Surviving the experience and given reading material on how to operate day to day using his mouth and feet, Hertz developed skill in using his teeth and his feet in place of his amputated arms. He has sharpened his teeth into fangs to use as weapons and has above average strength, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth. His toes are also very dexterous, allowing him to throw daggers with them, which is actually kind of cool in a little bit of a weird way. He was an enemy of the World War II hero Angel, which is not Warren Worthington. He was also an enemy of Wakanda, and after death, he even came into sort of indirect conflict with Hercules. That's cool. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video and you haven't already, make sure to press that subscribe button to join us here at Top 10 Nerd. We're almost at 1.30 million subscribers, so definitely get on that. Number 8. The Living Eraser. The Living Eraser is no mere man, you earthbound fools. Sorry, I love that quote from this character, it's kind of hilarious. Kutsa here is actually a Thalumian, and he was the agent of the Supremacy, and as an agent he would use his Dimensionalizer to kidnap scientists for nefarious designs. Ooh. The Living Eraser's Dimensionalizer can transport people to other dimensions, primarily between Earth and Dimension Z. As the Dimensionalizer passes over a surface, it turns it invisible, making it appear as if the victim is being erased. When the entire surface has been transformed, the being or object is transported across dimensions to its destination. If he literally erased people, it would be way more scary, but sending them to another dimension is a fixable thing in comics, so it's not exactly the worst. Number 7. Boomerang, but from Marvel. Fred Myers was born in Australia, but moved to America when he was a small child. Now in America, his great love was baseball, and he developed an extraordinary pitching arm. He became a professional baseball player in the minor leagues after graduating high school, and a few years later entered into the major leagues. Within a year though, he was suspended for accepting bribes. Now with an arm like that and no job, he was eventually contracted by the subversive criminal organization, the Secret Empire, and offered employment. They designed special weaponry for him to exploit his pitching ability, and he became their special operative, codenamed Boomerang. Now why Boomerang specifically and not like, I don't know, a baseball? Because he was born in Australia and that is the only projectile they have in that country, obviously. Number 6, Count Vertigo. Now you listen here, okay? Count Werner Vertigo is of royal blood. He is an heir to the throne of Vlatava, truly the most prestigious of titles, okay? But don't you think for one second that means he has cool superpowers, because he doesn't. Count Vertigo has a hereditary inner ear defect that affected his balance. That's not a superpower. Vertigo had a small electronic device implanted in his right temple though that compensated this problem. Tinkering with that device, Vertigo learned he was able to affect other people's balance as well, distorting their perception so that they literally could not tell up from down, which is an effect known as vertigo, and he used this skill to fight Green Arrow. He'd also use it to join up with the Suicide Squad and checkmate, using his powers to make people dizzy to his advantage. Very nice. Number 5, Codpiece. Personally, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when the character of Codpiece was conceived. Codpiece is honestly just a guy with a massive inferiority complex. That's what it says on his wiki though. I didn't make that up. Okay? Look, in high school, a girl told him he wasn't tall enough, but he thought she meant something else, and so instead of getting like a broken muffler or giant wheels on a giant truck, Codpiece created a suit that had a Codpiece multi-weapon built into the crotch area. The Codpiece had a wide variety of functions, including a cannon, missiles, a sonic attack, 2 retractable boxing gloves, and a variety of tools such as drills and scissors. If there is one way to compensate, it is by becoming a multi-tool. Look, he's doing the best with what he's got, okay? Number 4, Polka Dot Man. While this character got a bit of a change up in the recent Suicide Squad movie, Polka Dot Man, real name Abner Krill, in the comics didn't have a power. He instead wore a suit that was covered in different colored polka dots. When these polka dots were attached to the suit, they had no function, but once they were pulled off, they would enlarge and turn into different gimmicky weapons, like flying buzzsaws, blinding sun-shaped dots, dots that turned into fist-shaped projectiles, and even one that turned into a portal. That sounds kind of cool. The dots would even self-destruct to prevent anyone from studying the tech. The only problem was that the polka dot gadgets and the electronic suit were expensive to maintain, and Krill was just literally unable to afford it sometimes. The struggle is real, man. I feel you. Number 3, Paste Pot Pete. 1963's Strange Tales number 104 states, Human Torch battles the most fantastic foe of all, Paste Pot Pete and his unbeatable super weapon. Now said unbeatable super weapon just happened to be a glue gun that fired an extremely adhesive multi-polymer liquid that he invented. Paste Pot Pete, otherwise known as Peter Petruski or even Trapster, created a not hot glue gun, and his idea was to use this to commit crimes. As you can imagine, the Human Torch really had no problems whatsoever taking down old Pete here, and he continued to do so multiple times because Pete does not know when to give up, apparently. Number 2, Kite Man. Kite Man. Hell yeah. Now riddle me this, nerds. What good are powers like reality warping, energy projection, telekinesis, and super strength against a guy who flies around on a giant kite? Yeah, I'd like to see the Justice League take on Charles Brown and his giant kite. There's no way anyone could possibly stand against that. No sir. Not at all. Kite Man possessed a variety of gimmicked kites, including a jet-powered hang glider that allowed for quick escapes, a mammoth kite that the Kite Man used to shuttle criminals out of Gotham's prison, a flashbulb kite, and a trap net kite. Although, in more recent times, he did temporarily possess the powers of Titans, those abilities pale in comparison to the might of a good kite at your side though. And in at number 1 is Ten-Eyed Man. Okay, it's a DC writer's room. You and your buds are sitting around the table. You need a villain, but someone different, someone unique, someone who could pose a threat to the Caped Crusader, a villain that requires intelligence to beat, some could say. Then all of a sudden Frank stands up. I've got it! We take away a man's ability to see, and instead his vision will come from his fingertips, 5 eyes on each hand. A brief moment of silence follows as the genius that would become Philip Reardon, the Ten-Eyed Man, has just been created. That is his only power, and as you can imagine, this does pose some problems. For starters, his regular eyes are blind. Also, he is often easily defeated simply by injuring his very sensitive eye fingers, which can be done by tricking him into catching or touching something, or even theoretically giving him a high five. But let's not forget, it has been shown he can only be kept in a jail cell by keeping his hands locked in a special non-see-through box, because with eyes on his fingers, quote, escape would be child's play for him. It's true.
At number 10 is the infamous Gold Balls, aka Egg. Mentioned a handful of times already on this channel, Gold Balls is one of the more bizarre mutants to be given as much panel time as he has. Part of the new generation of mutants, Fabio Medina can summon golden balls on command, which don't actually have any destructive or useful properties whatsoever, at least on their own. Although it is soon discovered that when combined with the powers of 4 other mutants, Gold Balls is able to create a force field of immortality that can resurrect fallen mutants and protect others from death on the island of Krakoa. So there is, after all, a pretty impressive use for Fabio's abilities, but only when paired with the powers of 4 other mutants. On his own, he just squeezes onto this list. At number 9 we have Matter Eater Lad. This guy has a pretty rough set of powers which allow him to metabolize just about anything he swallows. That's right, the enzymes in his stomach are so strong that he can break down and digest anything no matter how large, even if they're radioactive and or otherwise damaging. Now, although he is a pretty silly superhero, Matter Eater Lad isn't at the number 1 spot because I can in some sense see how this power might be of use in the right situation. For example, let's say you have to get rid of a bomb that's about to explode. The chances are that this guy will be able to eat that problem away. Or if you need to get rid of a parasite that's threatening to take over the world, he could simply gobble it up so it can't repopulate. So yes, on paper, a hero with superpowered stomach enzymes sounds like a total joke, but I would only say he's mostly a joke. At number 8 is Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the DC universe, Rainbow Girl has the ability to use the colors of the rainbow to take on any human emotion she desires on command. Red represents anger, blue, hope, and green, willpower, and they all make up a pretty bad superhero, if we're being honest. Online, this character is even viewed as a symbol of an older time when male writers were a lot more simplistic and offensive with their portrayals of female characters. And if these emotion-driven powers based on the colors of the rainbow don't hit that home, her pheromone shield should be a hint that this is true, since that power is used to make her the most popular girl around. At number 7 is Skin. This guy just creeps me out. I've covered him before. Mainly because of how gross his powers are, as well as his name, but also because of how depressing and off-putting he looks in every panel that he appears in. Angelo Espinosa, aka Skin, has access to about 6 feet of extra skin that he can use to stretch around his enemies or use as a rope to swing around with. He's basically like Reed Richards, except his bones and muscles don't stretch along with his skin, and also Mr. Fantastic's limit doesn't stop at 6 feet. Skin is just a very unfortunate hero who might wish that he'd never gotten superpowers to begin with. At number 6 is Color Kid. This superhero has powers just as his name suggests, and not much more. He has the ability to change the color of anything on command. Part of the legion of substitute heroes and the assistant to a scientist on his home planet, Color Kid always seems to be in the shadow of greatness. And unfortunately, his powers don't help this cause very much either. Being able to change the color of anything isn't really such a useful power and often proves to disappoint his teammates, especially in combat situations. At number 5 is Arm Fall Off Boy. This guy is pretty clearly a gag character, but he's technically part of the official DC universe, so he's fair game for the list. Arm Fall Off Boy, worse name, has the incredible ability to detach his limbs and use them as melee weapons. As gross and as weird as this power is, it seems like he at least believes in himself, which is something. In one panel, we see him proudly popping his left arm off with a big plorp sound, preparing onlookers to be, quote, astounded by his power. He obviously doesn't have a huge backstory, so it's hard to expound too much on him, but he definitely makes history for being one of the worst heroes, if nothing else. At number 4 is the one and only, the infamous Bailey Hoskins, with the power to self-destruct. This is one of the more tragic superheroes who ends up losing his life after only 4 issues when he finally uses his power. We can assume that this character should land on a list like this every time, considering the comic book series that he's featured in is literally titled X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. But to be fair, this mini-series is known to be a pretty epic read considering the stakes at hand during the run. Bailey has to decide whether or not he's going to use his powers when an evil mutant dictator threatens to take over. At number 3 we have the people of New York City. Yes, even though it's hard to imagine calling them superheroes, at one point, the people of NYC are endowed with a very subtle power given to them by Reed Richards. And the power is to be able to tell which direction is north at all times. This is a response to the Spider Island evil plan set by Jackal, where he unleashes an army of little bugs that give people Spider-Man's powers. So to put everyone back on even keel, Richards decides that everyone should be turned into superheroes. The only thing is that to keep things simple, the ability given to the population of the city is so lame that it has gone down as one of the worst superpowers of all time, and has forced the innocent people of New York City to appear on this rather embarrassing list. At number 2 we have Dog Welder. Now, aside from this guy having one of the worst superpowers of all time, I also just think he's one of the worst superheroes based on who he is as a person. If you're a dog person, skip ahead to the next section because basically this bozo goes around and kills dogs that he finds in alleyways and then calls it a superpower to weld them to people's faces. And he's still considered a good guy. Now, I don't really understand the joke here, but if it is a joke, it's so over the top and weird that I don't even get it. I feel like DC was trying to come up with a meme character here for a laugh, but I don't like the part where he's just killing dogs, nor do I even get it at all. Dog Welder is a big thumbs down in my books, and I think he rightfully deserved a spot high on this list. Shame on you, Dog Welder. At number 1 is the silliest, worst superhero of all, with respect, J. Pennington Pennypacker, aka the Almighty Dollar. Living most of his life as an average citizen working as an accountant, Pennypacker eventually attends the Run-a-Monk self-esteem camp, which turns out to be the most fateful decision he's ever made. After attending the camp for a time, we learn that it's all just a front for a mysterious scientist who's working on completing a device that could give anyone superpowers. And when J. Pennington Pennypacker is endowed with his own powers, he's given an ability that's perfectly suited for his ridiculous name. He is, from that moment onwards, endowed with the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists at high velocities. Although he only appears in one issue of Marvel's NFL Super Pro back in 1992, the Almighty Dollar is technically an official part of the Marvel canon and must be treated as such.
Number 10, No Girl. No Girl is a creation of Grant Morrison's. Grant Morrison, when they were writing X-Men, decided to create a bunch of new mutants, and all of them were about as weird as you'd imagine someone like Morrison would make them. No Girl, of course, is, well, no exception. Her powers are actually pretty cool, but the fact that she didn't really have a body to speak of for a good amount of the time we've known her in the comics was not really as cool. Of course, this has since been somewhat fixed, as Martha no longer uses the codename No Girl, but instead, after having been given a body by the Five, is known as Cerebella. Cerebella's powers are psionic, but considering that she no longer has her original body as it was taken from her by the U-Men when she was only a teenager, it's often been implied that she actually requires substances to her brain to stay alive. Prior to being given a body again, Cerebella as No Girl was suspended in a liquid-filled sphere or tank and lived her life that way, as a brain. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please go check out our newest channel, Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, and give it a subscribe. Number 9, Angel. Angel might be one of the original X-Men, but that doesn't automatically mean that he is one of the All-Stars or Omega levels when it comes to mutants. Angel's mutant power is that he has wings, which he can use to fly. Angel also possesses hollow bones, which allow him to be light enough to soar using said wings, but also maybe make him a little bit hollow and weak in other ways. He is an extremely gifted and skilled flyer, having trained for years with how to use his wings, and he's also an adept businessman, being Warren Worthington III in civilian life, and hailing from a wealthy and respected family. However, it's still pretty easy to defeat Angel when you need to. Even recently in the comics, in X-Force issue number 30, we've seen him kidnapped and literally had one of his wings cut off as a result of people being angry and frustrated with the revelation that mutants have recently unlocked their own secret to immortality. Just goes to show you how easy it is to mess with Angel. It's kind of sadly too easy. Number 8, Brew. I honestly love Brew, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there, he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Brew may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the other more well-known mutants out there. Brew's mutant power and mutation actually make him compassionate, which for a member of the Brood is a super power really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy at all like humans do. But for an X-Men, well, it's kinda less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive, for a Brood, compassion is pretty amazing to have as an ability. And currently, Brew is also king of the Brood, so there's also that, which makes him pretty cool now, but wasn't always. Number 7, Star Fox. Star Fox's powers aren't bad in the way of them being, I would say, non-useful. They're more bad in the sense that they're considered to be, kinda shady. Star Fox is also known as Eros, originally named Aaron at birth by his parents. He had his name changed to Eros when he was still young due to his love of the ladies and his reputation for being a ladies' man. Eros in Greek mythology on Earth is known for being the god of passion and fertility, so this is pretty fitting. Star Fox is Thanos' brother, but instead of being a notorious villain like him, he would become a hero and even an Avenger. He has a lot of powers, but the one people tend to focus on when it comes to his more problematic powers is his ability to create emotional bridges and connections between people and affect one's feeling of pleasure, which has caused many to feel that Star Fox has manipulated others not just for altruistic purposes, but also for his own benefits as well. And also, you know, there's the question of consent. Pretty big question. Number 6, Red Bee. Aw, I know a lot of people love Red Bee, so I feel like this is a bit of a sad one to have on this list, but unfortunately, hey, I gotta pick some folks. Even if I myself love them as characters, you know, we gotta say some people got some bad powers. Red Bee is Richard Rayleigh, who is a hero from the World War II era in the New Earth continuity, who mainly fought his enemies with his amazing animal training skills and his bee sidekick, initially known back in his Quality Comics days as Michael the Bee, who was extremely intelligent and could also sting multiple times without perishing. No, I'm not kidding, it was a real thing. Tragically, Red Bee was of course killed off pretty early in the New Earth continuity. However, the brilliant part of this seemingly more lame character is that Red Bee is also a fan favorite and has actually been brought back a few different times in different iterations due to him having a small but pretty passionate fan base, I'd say. If you like Red Bee, let me know in the comments. I know you're out there, the Red Bee fans. Number 5, Peacemaker. Peacemaker is one of my favorite characters lately from DC, thanks to John Cena's portrayal of the character in his own self-titled miniseries, but I still acknowledge that this is one of the worst characters out there when it comes to his powers and his capabilities and just kind of a lot of stuff about him. In the comics, you might argue that Peacemaker's power actually stems from kind of his mental illness. The fact that he is extremely well trained. Before the DCEU, Gunn, and Cena made him cool, Peacemaker was Christopher Smith, a man haunted by his father's untimely end and past, who was trained to be basically a killer, believing that any force was necessary if it meant attaining some level of peace. If I had to sum up his depiction in the comics previously in one word, I would have said unhinged. I still think we'll get some of that explored more as the show progresses. We already kind of got some of it in season 1, but I do think it'll be approached from a more real and grounded place as opposed to just making Chris feel like the violent and often misguided lunatic that he seemed to be back in the New Earth continuity. Number 4, Doorman. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, and I don't even think they're technically affiliated with the Avengers, like I don't think the Avengers want to be affiliated with the Great Lakes Avengers. They are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you could possibly expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's quite specific, so finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman actually does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers to make himself seem pretty useful. Doorman's power allows him to create in essence a doorway or a door between adjacent areas that are separated, you know, like by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and, you know, much less useful in other cases, depending on the scenario. Number 3, Big Bertha. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of this is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a tall, thin, runway supermodel. Ashley, of course, can transform from bigger to smaller, but to do so, she has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic and why this made the list. More recently in the comics, Marvel has kind of tried to redeem this character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Big Bertha around in the comics for some time. They're trying though. Number 2, Beak. Not all mutants get to be as badass as Iceman or Cable. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Like Skin, who is on part 1 of this list, Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird, and he's basically built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even really fly. Struggled a lot with that. Beak has since figured out kinda how to fly, or rather like glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go short distances and it takes a lot of work. And even going short distances, he doesn't really have a ton of like tactical flying skills to speak of either. Fortunately, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Number 1, the Detachable Kid, or TDK. The Detachable Kid sounds like a pretty lame hero, and well, he is. He also isn't exactly a bona fide hero as he's a member of the Suicide Squad, but seeing as how this is a team primarily made up of, you know, reformed criminals and villains, well I mean villains at least who are forced into being good to get time lifted off their sentence, I think we can still count him. I think I'm gonna count him, so if you have a problem with it, we'll talk in the comments. TDK is played by Nathan Fillion in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and was created just for the movie and the DCEU, but the character does take inspiration from someone else on part 1 of this list, Arm Fall Off Boy, and his other post-Zero Hour comic book alternate, Splitter, who's also another version of that character. At least TDK has a somewhat cooler name, but unlike Arm Fall Off Boy, his prowess is a little less admirable. When it's time for him to fight, he detaches his arms and uses them to attack. Now the other cool thing I gotta say is TDK can actually control his arms like using his mind, which is kinda cool, but that plan is still pretty terrible and he's pretty quickly defeated by being shot a whole bunch, both in his detached arms, which he seems to, you know, still be able to feel, and directly in his body where he gets shot up a bunch, so he's instantly gone. Also, sorry, that's a spoiler, but also that movie's old now, so should have watched it. Number 10, Dazzler. I am really loath to put Dazzler on this list at all. Just feels bad. If you've been watching Top 10 Nerd for a while, then you likely know I am a big Alison Blair fan. I became one after I read through some of her original series and I fell in love with Alison, and I also fell in love with her power set. I actually really like it. However, as I've said before, having some of the worst powers doesn't mean that you're a bad character. It doesn't even mean that your powers are really all that bad. After all, it's kind of just in how you use them. But Allison, as Daz, typically prefers to use her powers to add light effects to her shows as a performer. She's been a superhero before, yes, and we've seen her do some pretty crazy things with her powers, yes, but it's not the life that she likes to live. She would actually rather downplay her abilities somewhat in terms of heroics, and then just use them to make pretty light shows in addition to her masterful singing abilities for people to enjoy, which, you know, makes them, I guess, the worst in terms of like superhero stuff. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Go check out Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. It's our newest channel, it's super exciting, and who knows, maybe one day I'll even go on and do an anime list for some reason. Could be fun. Number 9, Mr. Fantastic. This might be a massive hot take, but hey, you know, I'm going for it. You can come for me in the comments if you want to. That's fine. Well, I think Mr. Fantastic as a character is pretty cool, and his brilliance definitely cannot be denied. His power set has to be one of the worst amongst the people on his team. Am I right or am I right? I mean, Johnny Storm is the Human Torch who can fly around and literally engulf himself in flames. How cool is that? Ben Grimm is the Thing, who is tough and strong enough to face off against the Hulk, and Susan Storm Richards is Invisible Woman, the real powerhouse of the team who can turn invisible and create force fields big or small enough to defend against or defeat almost any opponent. Now, what does Mr. Fantastic have? He can stretch. really good? It's really more useful in specific circumstances, so that's why he's making my cut. Number 8, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is a member of the Legion of Superheroes. While other names have been suggested for Charles Tane, Bouncing Boy is the one that is stuck. And when I explain his powers, you're gonna see why we went with Bouncing Boy here. Charles apparently gained his powers after drinking an experimental super plastic formula. I feel like that would kill you, really. As a result, he became extremely, well, bouncy. He can inflate into a perfectly round ball and initially would use himself as a sort of like wrecking ball, if you will, honing and mastering his ability to direct himself as he bounced around. Later on, he would also become somewhat kind of like elastic in regards to his physiology, making him more bouncy. Initially, he was someone who tried out for the Legion of Superheroes multiple times and was rejected due to his powers being even too ridiculous for the team to consider. But the Prime Earth / Rebirth version of the character has successfully become a member of that team, so yay. Number 7, El Guapo. El Guapo hails from the strange mutant team known as Ecstatics. However, like most who have joined that team, he did not last too long. He died less than 10 issues after his first appearance and introduction. Poor El Guapo. El Guapo is Robbie Rodriguez, and his powers allow him to control a skateboard, but not all skateboards, just one skateboard. One that he happens to form a symbiotic connection with. But even that couldn't really save him, and he ended up dying, actually impaled by his own skateboard. It's rough sometimes. That's the Ecstatics way. Number 6, Peeper. Peeper is one of my favorite mutants, but sadly that does not save him like others before him, who I also love, from making this list. Sorry, Peeper. After all, this is part 3, and I already had some heroes that I loved in part 2, so what can I say? I guess I tend to love heroes whose powers actually seem less than super, so these are great lists for me. It's part of what I love about those characters, to be honest. Peeper is a mutant who, honestly, all the other mutant all-stars that he's interacted with recently have been super sweet too, and I love that. I'm here for that. Peeper's powers have to do with his physical mutation, which is that he has enlarged eyes. With his eyes, he can see things that others can't, possessing different forms of sight. Currently, Peeper uses his powers to help out his fellow teammates as a member of Swords the Six, although he's not really like part of the main Six because they're teleporters. He's not a teleporter, but he works with Sword and the Six to help expand the areas of mutant technology. Number 5, Penance. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first Civil War. In the comics, this was actually similar to, but different from the MCU and the Sokovia Accords. Similar in the sense that many people did die, many of them, in the case of the comics, civilians. Different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show, which, you know, would later become political because one of the team members, Nitro, went off and kind of killed a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to actually survive that incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance, in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, as many spikes I believe as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Number 4, Tag. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge in other people to either run away or run toward the person he's tagged. The person who's it? He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run would stop. So it's really weirdly specific. Number 3, Super Dupont. Super Dupont hails from a French comic strip from the 1970s. Super Dupont was meant to be a hero built on French nationalism, but that also spoofed the ridiculousness of American superhero comics as well as American stereotypes of of the French. Super Dupont's power set is like Superman's, but he's not nearly as powerful. He can fly, and he's also a master in the art of savate, a style of fighting known as French boxing. Super Dupont in the series is a mysterious figure who is said to be the son of one of the unknown soldiers buried under the Arc de Triomphe. Although how that soldier then would remain unknown, it seems kind of questionable, because if he was your father, wouldn't you know who he was? So you no longer be an unknown soldier. He fights against the Anti-France organization, which is exclusively made up of all foreigners, non-French people. These people speak a fictional language in the comics that is a mishmash of non-French languages, and it's called Anti-Francais, which I think is super ridiculous. Number 2, Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder was high up on our first part to this list, but did you know there isn't just one Dog Welder out there? I know, it's shocking considering that his power set in essence involves welding people to weld. I mean, you know, it's in his name. And it's pretty unspeakable if you ask me. How is this a hero at all? Never mind, how did we make a second version of him? Dog Welder 2 ends up being possessed by the welding equipment of the former Dog Welder, and even ends up at one point welding his family. Unable to resist the compulsion to weld, he must weld. It's a curse. Despite all this, he's still considered a hero somehow. He also ends up joining along with the superhero team known as Section 8. Dog Welder 2 is even more ridiculous than the first in that he learns the true origins of his powers actually come from the Egyptian god Anubis, and also saves the world by welding 2 stars together, one of which is Sirius, also known as the Dog Star. Get it? Number 1, Six Pack. Six Pack is the leader of Section 8, the same team Dog Welder is on, both the first and the second Dog Welder. His powers, or abilities rather, involve him having a high tolerance for drinking, and it's been implied at one point that he may, and I'd like to emphasize the word may, have reality warping powers. But if he does, he doesn't really know how to use them. This was something that the many angled ones sensed in him when they faced off against him, and he was apparently able to create a force field, but he didn't know how he'd done it. Six Pack is also known as Sydney Speck. He is generally known for being intoxicated, hence his name, which is in reference to drinks, and in fact being completely sober can work against him. While sober, Six Pack is forced to face the harsh reality of his life, which can make him question what he is doing and why. I mean, considering his power set and his general focus, that makes sense. Fair enough.